The Capital Investment Committee hearing for February 26 is called to order. Members, we don't have a quorum, and so we'll move straight to our presentation today. Last week, we heard from MMB and heard about transportation-related funding from IIJA, and today we'll hear more about broadband and environment-related funding. Welcome back, Director. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Lee, Vice Chair Ryer, and members. For the record, my name is Micah Intermill, and I'm the state's Enterprise Director for Federal Funds Implementation, housed out of MMB. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today, along with colleagues from across the enterprise, to continue the conversation we started last Monday and continued last Wednesday regarding the state's activity under the federal investment bills, those being the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, and CHIPS and Science, or CHIPS Act. Today's conversation will focus on areas of IIJA funding that fall largely outside of the transportation space, though, as you'll hear, there is substantial overlap with transportation in the area of resilience. We concluded our conversation last Wednesday with the safety category, so today we'll be working through the final 6 categories on this slide, beginning with broadband. As a reminder, the total amount of projected IIJA funding for Minnesota as an enterprise is approximately $9.7 billion. This includes both the announced competitive awards as well as the calculated formula distributions as reported by Federal Funds Information for States. Due to federal appropriations processes, actual awards received by the state will be slightly less than the amount shown on this slide. You heard of this last Wednesday with MnDOT, and we'll hear about it again today with water and other areas. In addition, today's conversation around clean energy and power, we will again revisit the opportunities under the IRA that relate directly to the committee's goal of supporting local governments to find and secure the means necessary to support clean energy infrastructure. And while most of today's conversation will focus on monies received and being spent by the state enterprise, because of the nature of energy and power, you'll hear a fuller conversation in that area of work being done by non-state entities as well. That concludes today's brief orientation to today's topic, and we will now move into a category-by-category review. In the area of broadband, according to FFIS, $62.6 billion is available under the IIJA for states. $887 million is projected to flow to Minnesota, and all of these programs fall under the purview of the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Ms. Mackey for additional conversation.
Welcome, Director. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Lee. My name is Bree Mackey, and I'm the Executive Director at the Office of Broadband Development. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work that we are doing at the Office of Broadband under the federal. So as many of you know, the state was allocated $661 million, but part of our dollars there came from the Federal Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act in the form of $65 billion across all of the states and territories nationally. There are 2 programs within this jurisdiction that we have here at the Office of Broadband. One is the BEAD, or the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, and that is the infrastructure program. So when we talk about BEAD, that's really getting internet service to the premises, to the residents, and to the businesses across the state. The digital equity funding is all of the other things. I'm going to talk more in detail later in the program, but Minnesota did receive a formula-based allocation for each of those programs. And then each of those programs require our office to create statewide plans. Slide. All right, so as I indicated, the BEAD dollar amount that we received is $651 million, almost 62, or $652 million. And we were directed by the legislature to run those programs, those dollars, through our existing border-to-border programs at the Office of Broadband. Details on the initial proposal are available online. We did submit our proposal or our plan. We're in the process right now of negotiating with NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications Administration. So they're the federal program or federal agency that is leading this work. Part of this infrastructure dollars requires us to really look at 3 priority, and there's a lot more priority areas under, but we really have to utilize these dollars in priority 1 and priority 2 first. So all the unserved locations have to be shown in our plan to be able to get served with the dollar amounts that we have available. The second priority we can move on to is the underserved. And now just to note that Minnesota defines our unserved locations of 100 by 20. That is directly different than what underserved is for the federal dollars. So unserved, is the 25-3, priority 1. Underserved is the 100 by 20. If we still have dollars available, once we show in our plan that we can get to all of those locations, we can then move on to priority number 3, which would be community anchor institutions. We estimate, based on the number of locations and the dollar and the cost here in Minnesota, that we probably will just get through 1 and 2. This map is a little difficult to see, but I just do want to point out that the red areas on the map are locations across the state, so you can still see that there are many locations that are unserved on the 25-3. The orange is the underserved, and then all of the green is where there is currently reliable broadband service. Again, you can go on and zoom in to each location much more granulated, but this just gives you an idea that there are still a lot of areas across Minnesota that do not have service. And then just another definition is currently the Office of Broadband, and how we define what reliable broadband service is wired service. However, the NTIA definitions are wired and licensed fixed wireless. And then the last thing on this particular one I do want to talk about is the challenge process. So something that's really important for communities and the work that you are doing right now is making sure that when we open this challenge process, that the only ones that can challenge locations on the map of whether they are served or unserved are local units of government, nonprofits, and internet service providers. So right now we are trying to work with our counties and our local units of government to prepare and make sure all the locations on the map are accurate. Once that is done, then we'll have a snap in time of what all the locations are in the state that need to be served, and utilizing those dollars that we are receiving from NTIA. Note, any locations that we find does not include additional funding. Our funding is set. But it is an opportunity to take off locations that perhaps are incorrectly listed as unserved, such as in a field where there's, an old shack that is never going to be served. We want to take those locations on the map off, and also make sure they're accurate, that locations that were maybe missed are captured in this challenge process. All right, so the timeline. Right now, we are in the second. The initial proposal has been submitted to NTIA for review. That proposal includes 2 volumes, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Once Volume 1 is approved fully by NTIA, we can open that challenge process and wait and still do the second volume and get that approved. Once both plans are approved and as a whole, then we can start the subgrantee selection process. So again, before we actually receive the dollars and we can start doing infrastructure, we have to have a plan that shows that all those locations will be served. So I won't go through each of those, but as the process is laid out, we have 365 days to do our final proposal, and once that is approved, then we'll move forward. So in most estimates as far as timeline, when would construction start in Minnesota? Probably won't be until the spring of 2026. Move to the next slide. All right, so now moving on to the Digital Equity Act. So the Digital Equity Act is a separate piece of the IIJA funding, and Minnesota received planning dollars in the amount of $881,000 to be able to produce and put together a state plan. Our digital opportunity plan has been submitted, and we're just finalizing that and waiting for final approval with NTIA. This plan was an opportunity for us to capture all of the things. So it's great if you have the broadband infrastructure, but you have the tools, the resources, the education, all the things that really make it where you are able to utilize the internet in a way that is meaning for you. Move to the next slide. actually go back one, sorry. We, once our plans are approved and every state and territory are doing this, then they'll move into capacity grants. And those grants will be what was identified in the plan, how will you go about using those dollars to ensure that we are providing opportunities laid out in our plan. And then there will be some competitive grants, local units of government and others can apply for directly from the federal NTIA, and that will not be ran through our office. How we approached our strategy in developing the plan is really to form digital connection committees across the state. So there was over 106 different self-directed groups that developed information and then provided that to us so we could put a plan together. So I think it's really important that the approach that we made was not let's design a plan and then go out for public comment. Let's go out there and gather all the barriers, resources, information that communities have across the state, and then develop a plan that's meaningful. Then after we did that, we went and did listening sessions so that we could gather public comment across the state as well. So you can see we did 18 of those. Finally, where are we at right now? So our plan is still posted online. It is the draft plan. Once we have a final plan approved by NTIA, we will make sure to update that. We, at this point, we do not know when the notice of funding will come out from NTIA, and we do not know the dollar amount of our capacity grants. So we are waiting right now, patiently or impatiently, so that we can continue this great work. And the final slide I just want to share, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions, is the Affordable Connectivity Program is a program that is really critical to the state of Minnesota. And you all are probably aware that is a federal program we do not administer, but it does tie really well to making sure that people are able to access and in an affordable way the internet to do and thrive. So I just want to share that, Minnesota is participating in this program, and it would be very harmful to our residents if that does not get continued funding and support federally. So with that, that is all that I have, and happy to take any questions.
Members, any questions for the director? Representative Carroll.
Thank you. Could you talk about some of the areas that aren't served, and if there's any commonalities between them, whether it's geographic, terrain, whatever, or other reasons?
Director.
Thank you, Chair Lee and Representative. So I think it's important to note that there are areas across the state, whether it is urban or in greater Minnesota, that are unserved. What I think is most important to note on that is that those locations aren't served already because it is expensive and costly to do so. We now do have the low population program that goes up to 75% cost share in our state. And so we know that those locations that are the most expensive and hardest to serve are the ones that are still showing up on the map. They're not those cluster areas that make the good business case to do so. But geographically, we have 3 counties, I believe, in the state that are fully served. Rock County is one of them, and I'm going to miss the other 2. But we also know terrain can be part of that, certainly. And again, I think density is really key there.
Representative Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. So you've identified 2 factors, terrain and density. Any other factors?
Director.
Thank you, Chair and Representative. I think those are the key ones that are the most expensive to serve. Is probably because of the low density. So it's hard to make a business model and convince a provider that it's a good business case when you're running fiber, say, 2 miles away. It's definitely more expensive. When you have more of those pockets and density, you can make the business model a little bit easier. So certainly, the terrain is a difficulty. We have all sorts of that, different terrains across this karst topography that make lines of sight where wireless doesn't work and fiber is more reliable.
Representative Ryer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Mackey. I have a question about the timeline, and apologies if you covered this as we went through so much. But I'm wondering what drives the different phases and then not starting until 2026. Is that how the federal government set it up, or is that how we're choosing to implement? Are there ways to start, reaching the ones who were, we have first grant selected in September of 2024, yet they don't start construction? Can you talk about that a little?
Director.
Thank you, Chair Lee and Representative. So a lot of it is dictated by the approval process with NTIA. So every state and territory is responsible for developing their infrastructure plan, and every state is a little unique on how they approach that. For a state like Minnesota, who has had strong leadership in the broadband space for 10 years, we've done this work for a long time, and so we're trying to fit a program into also the things that are required by the federal government to be able to receive those dollars. This is also very unique for the state and states because we have to have all our subgrantee selections done, which includes all of the unserved and then underserved locations before we can start rolling out a grant program. So certainly we would love to start and then go and do it, chronologically, basically. My staff, very small staff, would appreciate that too. But really a lot of the timelines are based on the approval process. So as I stated, our volumes are with NTIA. When we are approved on volume 1, we can open that challenge process. The challenge process can run up to 120 days. So there'll be a 30-day window where challenges can be submitted by the ISPs, local units of government, and nonprofits. Then the office has 30 days where people can challenge that. So other providers can say, no, we have service, we don't have service, all the things, they're served, not served. And then we have up to 60 days, or 90 days, I believe, where we deduplicate. So our office has to make sure there's no other federal dollars coming in, no state dollars, all the things. And then we have that map set in time of all the unserved locations that we're required to serve. I will say, then it goes back to NTIA. So we have that 365 days to finalize our total plan, including that challenge process. So that then takes us into next year. And then it will take NTIA some time to go through that and approve it, and there'll probably be some back and forth curing on that because I'm sure we're not, as much as we'd like to, going to get it approved first pass. And then we'll go into, once it is approved, we'll do contracting with the ISPs who are receiving those grant dollars. And ultimately, we will have a normal winter, and construction won't be able to start in the middle of a winter. So that's why I'm saying the spring of 2026 makes the most sense.
So I have a quick question, Director. I know that you have submitted your plan to NTIA and you're awaiting feedback and whatnot, and you're adjusting your draft plan in place. And so is there still opportunities for members of the public, members of the legislature to comment on the draft plan as you wait for final approval, or has that process been completed and so now the only amendments to the draft plan is through your communications with NTIA?
Thank you, Chair Lee. So I would say that the door is not closed for us to receive additional feedback. If you are seeing things in the plan that you strongly would like to stay there, there are areas in the plan where NTIA have come back to us and provided feedback that as the state of Minnesota we are not comfortable with and are asking for either waivers to that feedback because we are told to align it as best that we can with our existing programs by legislature. As far as public feedback and in general, certainly we did that, and it's not necessarily closed door, but what's in the plan is really, I think, thoughtful, and we did, work with all of our associations and communities to gather that feedback. So a lot of it is based on what we have and maybe doesn't meet the federal as much as they would like us to. So again, the door isn't necessarily closed, but there are areas that we are definitely negotiating with them on importance to the office and to the state.
Thank you, Director. And then the last question that I have for you, I think in your presentation you said that the BEAD allocation of $651 million, probably we will only be able to serve priority 1 and 2. Are you able to give a breakdown of how much will be towards priority 1, how much will be towards priority 2?
Thank you, Chair Lee. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to at this time. It really depends on that challenge process and the FCC map. So the original allocation was based on the FCC maps and was approximately 135,000 homes and businesses that didn't have the 25.3. And so with inflation, with the cost of goods and service, all of the things, it's really hard for me to be able to tell how far we'll be able to get into priority two. I think it's also important that there are a lot of other funding federal agencies, as well as we have grant round 9 and then another grant round 10 of 100 million total with state dollars that will be taking locations off the map too. But we just don't have that information finalized yet until we go through the challenge process.
Seeing no other questions, thank you, Director, for coming before us. Next, we have the Assistant Commissioner from Commerce for Clean Energy and Power. Welcome, Assistant Commissioner. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you for having me today, Chair and Committee. My name is Pete Wyckoff. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Federal and State Energy Initiatives at the Department of Commerce in the Energy Division.
Mr. Chair and members, in the area of clean energy and power, per FFIS, $13.6 billion is available under the IIJA for states. $597 million is projected to flow to Minnesota as a recipient, and all but one of these programs fall under the purview of the Department of Commerce. The dollars you see under the National Dam Safety Program, which encourages and promotes the establishment and maintenance of effective federal and state dam safety programs to reduce the risk to human life, property, and the environment from dam-related hazards. Those dollars flow to DNR.
Thank you, Micah. As I said, I am Commissioner in the Department of Commerce. Until 11 months ago, I was Senator Tina Smith's lead on energy in Washington, D.C. You're the second Smith staffer you're hearing from in a row. In that capacity, I was there for the negotiations of the IIJA and even more directly for the negotiation of the IRA. Happy to answer questions on any of those from that perspective. I want to start briefly here by giving a bigger picture that I will return to in the second half of my presentation. The previous slide indicated that there was $13.5 billion in IIJA funding available to states in the clean energy and power category. There's actually substantially more than that if you consider that the clean energy and power category in its entirety and include money that come to Minnesota but not via a direct pass-through involving state grants. And I can get back to that in a few minutes. The total grant funding for clean energy and power includes $75 billion in grants in the IIJA. That is on top of the $110 billion in the IRA funding for climate and clean energy grants. The approximately $500 billion in IRA low-interest federal loan authority for clean energy, mostly through the Department of Energy Loan Program Office, and the uncapped clean energy tax credits that may be worth well over $1 trillion nationally. For this committee's work, it is important to note that the tax credits are available as direct payments to non-taxable entities, including the state of Minnesota itself. In terms of formula funding from the IIJA, we actually don't have a whole lot of it coming through Commerce. I'm going to briefly touch on the pots of money. I'll also note that this money isn't all that flexible. It can't really be repurposed for other uses. So a very quick tour of the $123 million in total funding we have coming in. The first one to note is $7.1 million for the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grants Program from the IIJA. Of that $7.1 million, the bulk of it will go directly to 38 local governments through a direct allocation. That includes the 10 most populous counties and the 28 largest cities. The remaining $2.25 million will come directly to the state, and most of that will be used to fund a grant round for smaller counties and cities. Next slide. We also have in in this funding pool a allocation from the revolving loan fund in the IIJA. For Minnesota, that will be just under $2 million in loan funding. That will support the expansion of our Regional Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, or CPACE program, which provides loans for energy efficiency improvements in commercial buildings. Next slide. We also, in the formula funding, have expansion of the funding available. We already get money, but we're getting more because of the IIJA for the state energy program. In Minnesota, that funding is $7.7 million over 5 years, and we are essentially using that to fund information availability, gathering and availability in the energy space, and technical assistance to utilities and communities and whoever needs information about the Minnesota energy system. There is a big focus here on energy security. That means both physical security of energy assets and also cybersecurity. Next slide. Another pool of money that will total $31 million in the end is the strengthening the reliability and resiliency of Minnesota's electrical grid program we are standing up through IIJA funding. We have a $17 million round of funding to award this year to utilities, and we are proceeding to get that RFP up. Finally, we have in the Department of Commerce a long-standing unit that has run the federal pass-through program, which is this federal weatherization program. The IIJA bumps up funding for that program temporarily for 5 years. Minnesota is receiving, over that 5 years, $76 million in additional funding, approximately doubling the amount we usually get. 60 million of that we'll use for direct service, which is approximately enough to weatherize 4,600 Minnesota homes. Next slide. I want to turn to the competitive grant side of IIJA for a bit, and just start by noting that Commerce tracks all clean energy and power grant funding opportunities available through the IIJA and the IRA. And we track grants that come directly to Minnesota and also grants with a Minnesota nexus. So we in Commerce lead on both formula funding and competitive funding opportunities, but we usually are in collaboration with other entities. We support, for those who don't actually officially need to go through Commerce, other ways of supporting their grant applications. I'm going to talk a little more about that in a second. We are currently leading on $1.6 billion in grant proposals in the clean energy and power space. $623 million of that has been awarded, mostly from IIJA. We are tracking non-commerce related grants in this space to the tune of about $1.6 billion. We are collaborating, of course, with Micah and his team at the new federal funds implementation unit as we seek to work in tandem with them on this tracking. We've had some successes on the competitive side of the IIJA. I'll mention two. One, in the area of building codes, we have received a resilient and efficient codes grant from the Department of Energy to the tune of $5.3 million. Again, we usually work in collaboration. In this case, it's collaboration with the Department of Labor and Industry and the NGO Center for Energy and the Environment. Based on that success, we're in the process of following up with two new $10 million grants in that grant proposals in that space. And then we have our biggest success thus far. Commerce led a coalition of stakeholders in putting together two large proposals to the first round of the Department of Energy Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership, or GRIP, grant funding. One of those was funded, and it was the largest GRIP grant funded anywhere in the United States in the first round of IIJA funding. At the same time, GRIP illustrates that not all IIJA money that will benefit Minnesota needs to come through the state of Minnesota. Excel and Elite Minnesota Power also received separate awards that will benefit Minnesotans, also through the GRIP program. Just more on this very large grant. This is a joint project, a grant proposal organized by Commerce, but the award will fund work across MISO, the Regional Balancing Authority that cuts through the center of the United States, including most of Minnesota running north-south. That is one of the parties involved. The other big party involved is Southwest Power Pool, or SPP, which runs immediately through the country just to the west of MISO. Minnesota's western edge gets pulled into SPP. What the grant essentially does is allow for the building of short but essential lines across those two grid balancing authorities, which for the line length just has tremendous amount of benefit because it's normally hard to move electricity east-west across those boundaries. The project involves 5 lines and will, once it's finished, not only help with the resiliency, costs, and reliability of the electrical system, but it will unlock approximately 30 gigawatt, that's a lot, of new generation, mostly wind and solar. And the grant also included targeted training and workforce development for disadvantaged communities. Next slide. The other big IIJA grant in this space that's come to Minnesota, but not to the state of Minnesota, that you've probably heard about, is something called a Hydrogen Hub grant. There were only 6 or 7 of these awarded nationally, and one of the awards was to something called the Heartland Hydrogen Hub, which spans Minnesota and North Dakota. That hub, on the Minnesota side, all that funding is coming through Excel with projects in Ag Country in western Minnesota and also projects slated for the Twin Cities area to support uses like transportation. So we are going after a lot of funds, and we're having a lot of success doing it. One of the things that's starting to help us ramp up that even more are 2 things that you all, as legislators, passed last session. One is something called the State Competitiveness Fund, which is administered by Commerce, and is for clean energy and power projects. It is divided into 3 big pots. The first pot, which is grants to local groups that can help under-resourced small towns, tribes, even small utilities have the capacity to apply for these grants. We are about to announce 25 awardees to divide up the entire $6 million pot of money that you guys appropriated for this. We also have a $100 million pot for state grants to leverage federal grants. We are finalizing the second round of grants to match grants. We'll report to the legislature this week, so I can't give any details yet, but just broadly, we anticipate approximately 70% of the fund, the $100 million, will be reserved after we finalize the new round, leveraging, so it's about $70 million, leveraging about $800 million in federal funds, so about a 10-to-1 leverage, or 12-to-1 leverage. Thanks. The other big thing to note, also coming out of the last legislative session, is that Commerce is standing up something called the Minnesota Climate Innovation Finance Authority, or MNCIFA, which is the first state green bank in Minnesota. So Minnesota's new green bank is funded with $45 million in state funding, but that funding allows us to go after 2 big sources of money, both from the IRA. One is something called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is a $20 billion grant competition that is going on right now from the EPA. We expect tens to hundreds of millions of dollars from that funding source to come to Minnesota and be greatly aided by the existence of the Green Bank. We also hope to co-invest with the Department of Energy Loan Program, and a lot of what they do requires a state entity to work with, and MNCIFA is that state entity and is already registered with the Department of Energy. MNCIFA is just getting off the ground, but it has put out in the last couple of weeks a request for information seeking folks who would like to co-invest with MNCIFA, with the hopes of finding projects that can be co-invested not only by MNCIFA, but also by the DOE Loan Program Office. We are casting our net in a broad way, looking for proposals for decarbonization of existing buildings. They could be state buildings, transportation pollution reduction, emission reduction technologies for industry and agriculture, and power generation. The RFI will close March 15th, but It will never really close because MNCEFA will always be looking for more opportunities. The basic deal is if we can find things that can be both invested in by the DOE Loan Program Office and by MNCEFA, if MNCEFA puts in at least 1% approximately, DOE Loan Program can fund 80% of the project. We still need to come up with the other 19%, and that's why we're looking to co-invest with other government entities, banks, private companies, and philanthropies. Looking forward and finishing up, please remember, for your purposes, most of the federal support for clean energy is not in the form of grants. These low-interest federal loans and the tax credits, which for the state and for other nonprofits act like grants you're guaranteed to get, are the key to really tapping into large-scale federal resources. Next slide. In terms of the DOE Loan Program Office, what we're going after is the highlighted in red pot, which is $80 billion in what's called the Innovative Clean Energy Loan Guarantee Program. If you are working with a state green bank in collaboration in a way that will meet a state climate goal, you can pretty much fund anything, and the innovative word is waived. It can be about deployment from that pot of money, and that is what MNCEFA is looking to go after. Next. Finally, from your point of view, what might be useful, I think, for things that we would otherwise have to bond for and to support, the tax credit provisions for clean energy include wind and solar. There's a lot of opportunities for the state to be involved in solar energy development related to state properties, standalone energy storage projects, and has been expanded to not just be about wind and solar. These are tax credits that have been expanded and extended and are now actually worth quite a bit more than they used to be. But it now includes geothermal and district energy systems, combined heat and power plants. Next slide. And these are credits, again, that would come as a direct pay option, so they're essentially grants. And I want to end quickly by saying they can pay a lot of these projects and the cost of these projects if you are able to check a bunch of boxes. For instance, if you did the solar investment tax credit for a state-run project, there's a base credit of 6%, but as soon as the state says we're going to use prevailing wage and apprenticeship labor for doing the project, the tax credit goes up to 30%. If you do it in a community that's losing fossil fuel jobs or on any brownfield, it goes up another 10%. If you use domestic content, let's say the Helene solar modules made in northern Minnesota might be a good place to start for a solar project, the credit goes up another 10%. And if you can show that you are benefiting primarily low-income Minnesotans, there are ways to make that credit rise another 10 to 20%. If you're able to check all the boxes on a project, there are situations where the federal government will pick up 70% of the tab via these direct pay tax credits. Happy to come back and talk more about that. I'm out of time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioner Floyd. Threw a lot of numbers at us there.
I did. Happy to slow down. And
And just want to make sure that we know the total money of the IIJ, IRA, how much is available in this, in all the different programs that you outlined.
So, Commissioner, or maybe a question to the director from MMB.
Just to the, through the chair and to the ranking member, I think to clarify your question, are you looking across all categories or just specifically with energy?
Representative Erdahl.
I'm looking for those items under the
Commissioner.
so in the energy space, I'm sorry. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative. In the energy space, as Micah, I think, started off with, there's only $13.5 billion that's federal formula funding in the IIJA. We have a substantial amount of formula funding that I wasn't asked to talk about coming through the IRA. So don't have the numbers, how much they totally add up to for Minnesota, but we have that $123 million in formula funding through the IIJA. Our biggest formula funding program through the IRA is $150 million. So we're talking low multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of formula funding. So that's guaranteed to come to Minnesota. For everything else, it's us being competitive. With the exception of the tax credits that are open to anybody. It's just how much activity do you choose to do as a state? And it's not just us choosing, it's us in private enterprise choose to do as a state that generates these tax credits. So it's uncapped.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Solar, it's a lot of money. Now, I think you're touching on that. This is available to private and public entities.
Yes.
Commissioner.
Oh, sorry. I'll get this down. My first time testifying to you guys. So. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative. This is available to both private and public, as illustrated by things like the $975 million grant to Excel and a bunch of other companies for a hydrogen hub. There's no actual state money there.
Representative Erdahl.
In greater Minnesota, there seems to be an expanding movement for more solar and wind. Thursday night was at a presentation in Rhode Island for a new solar expansion north of town. Is there any, I see you mentioned wind and solar here, but are there any specific directives or, I'd like to see a certain percent in this or that, or the usage of this money?
Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. There's not a set amount. It has to go to rural areas versus urban areas. That said, there are a lot of programs that are specifically focused on rural areas. There's a $10 billion IRA grant program that several rural electric co-ops have applied to right now that will hopefully be successful and bring money in, and that will exclusively serve rural Minnesota. There's also a general state policy and an attempt in a lot of the programs to serve underserved areas, and that is defined by a bunch of ways, including income, which should shunt more of the money more easily into rural Minnesota than to, say, more other parts of Minnesota. Does that answer your question?
Representative Erdahl.
You want me to keep going?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. Yeah, I think, that does answer my question, of course, and you run into the other side of it as well, where, concerned about the taking farmland out of production.
Yep. These are
Angle that needs to be considered.
These are complicated issues. I raised my kids in Morris, Minnesota, so this is where I come from, western Minnesota, most recently.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and, kind of following up on that and looking at the layer cake, it talks about additional tax credits for low-income communities. But, you just mentioned the grants, and I'm wondering how do you target environmental justice areas? How do you reach people who may not have received these? They don't have a rural co-op to apply. They're part of a system where maybe their region is considered the whole metro area, and they're a poor community in the metro area. So I'd like to know, how are you considering affordability? Are you looking at median household income when you're looking at these grants, or are you, maybe that's just a broader question?
Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative. So within, let's just take one example, MNCEFA. The Green Bank has an explicit mandate to apply Justice 40 principles so that at least 40% of the benefits go to disadvantaged communities. And we'll be taking that very seriously. A big part of the reason that the first pot of money that we got out from the State Competitiveness Fund was to go to build capacity in places that didn't, or with groups and institutions that maybe don't have capacity, was to try to level the playing field in that way. The thing you hinted at there, which is that if you look at the whole Twin Cities, it looks, relatively affluent, but there are certainly pockets. The tools we have are much more fine-grained than the whole Twin Cities metro area, though I know there's some frustration nationally about the school bus program, and then maybe where that's coming from. But in terms of most of the projects and programs we're looking at, there's a much more fine-grained definition of disadvantaged community.
Representative Hanson.
It'd be helpful when the grants go out if maybe the committee could be provided with a map and the amounts of where the dollars go.
Commissioner.
We are definitely working with my team and with Micah's team on providing that sort of information, including maps of where the money is going.
Thank you, Commissioner. Seeing no other questions, thank you so very much for coming by. Next up, we have Supervisor Faust from the MPCA. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon. My name's Martha Faust, and I'm a supervisor in the Community Outreach and Engagement Unit within the Brownfields program at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
So, Mr. Chair and members, in the area of environmental remediation, according to FFIS, roughly $15.3 billion is available under the IIJ for states as recipients. Approximately $7 million is projected to flow to Minnesota, and this is one of those imperfect areas of reporting from FFIS where the $7 million commingles both monies that came to the state as well as monies that went to a few local governments. But all of those dollars are flowing through the MPCA, so I will hand it over.
Thank you, Micah. So yes, just a bit more on that $7 million. $3 million went to Hennepin County, $1 million to the St. Paul Port Authority, and approximately $3.9 million to MPCA. And I'll be speaking to that portion now. So next slide. So there's 3 different grants that are broken down that you can see on the slide. The first is in fiscal 22, a $2 million grant for community-wide assessments at brownfield sites. It's a 5-year grant that will fund 64 environmental site assessments. So that's phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments that occur at redevelopment sites, and up to 15 specific cleanup plans. Those are in 4 target areas that were defined according to competitive criteria. The first being the Lake Street corridor in Minneapolis, second, the West Broadway corridor in North Minneapolis, the University Avenue corridor in St. Paul, and the fourth being the city of Cass Lake. And approximately $1.5 million of that funding has been encumbered to date. There's approximately $489,000 that is available at this moment. I say approximately because we're receiving grant applications on a weekly basis, and it's been a pretty constant spend rate. And there is no flexibility in that funding for any other uses. So that's kind of bucket 1. The second is a grant in fiscal year 22-23, and that's $1.6 million to enhance community engagement. It's also pays for some, a good amount of it has gone for, again, those brownfield site assessments and cleanup plans. And as of March 31st, 2024, there's no funds remaining. And then I can speak a little bit to that bullet and the next in terms of the enhancing community engagement piece. So what that is essentially marketing the funds to communities and community organizations throughout the state, providing technical assistance so that they have access to be able to apply for those brownfield grants. We are focusing on environmental justice areas of concern throughout the state, rural communities and emerging developers, which are defined as developers who've done 5 projects or less. So that was the fiscal 22-23 grant. And then it's essentially the same grant again for fiscal 23-24. We received $869,000 for a mix of those brownfield site assessments and also the community engagement activities. And we have encumbered $463,000 to date. The available remainder, again, is approximately $432,000. But again, those funds, those grants have been, we're receiving grant applications on essentially a weekly basis, and funds are continuing to go out the door. And that's a 1-year grant that's good until September 30th of 2024, and there is no flexibility on other uses in that category. Next slide, please. So just a couple of additional comments. So Minnesota will continue to pursue funds to expand our outreach to underserved communities and advance community cleanups. And there is significant available funding through the EPA's Brownfields program through their competitive grants on an annual basis. And so one of the things that my unit is working on is doing like a webinar and a grant workshop to be able to market the availability of those funds to communities throughout the state and to provide technical assistance to just help them navigate that process of applying for an EPA grant, because it's a lot for communities to be able to do that themselves. And there are opportunities that are part of our daily work to ensure that community needs are included in the redevelopment of properties in neighborhoods throughout the state, and that our underserved communities are receiving additional support. So that's what I have at this point. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Members, any questions? So Supervisor, just real quickly to the 4 sites that you mentioned in fiscal year 22, did the MPCA apply for that funding on behalf of those 4 sites? And if that was the case, is there a plan or is there federal funding available for you to expand beyond those 4 locations and look at other sites across the state?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So the MPCA applied with cooperation from the City of Cass Lake, City of Minneapolis, City of St. Paul, as well as Hennepin and Ramsey counties for that particular application, and that was part of a competitive annual application. They were all selected as areas that had, for various reasons, have had some economic disinvestment and needing that support. And within those grants, you usually have to define target areas and that are measured then against the scoring criteria. But the way it works with EPA is that if we are trying to market actively in those areas, but if we receive requests from other areas of St. Paul or Minneapolis or other EJ areas throughout the state, we can also and have funded individual projects within those areas, and we'd be happy to provide a summary if you'd be interested in that information.
That would be great, please. And then just last question, the last bullet points up there about other opportunities to ensure that community needs are included and redevelopment of properties. Do you work with local partners, for example, for me, City of Minneapolis, or do you work directly with just the residents and developers when they have a potential project?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's kind of both. We are trying to hit on all different levels of working, participating in a Brownfield grant webinar tomorrow with Met Council, DEED, Hennepin and Ramsey County, for example. So reaching out directly to cities throughout the state, but we also have a Brownfield grants hotline and email inbox on our website. So we're getting inquiries from small cities throughout the state almost on a weekly basis. And then in terms of emerging developers, it's both going to venues where there are, ongoing technical assistance forums. I spoke at the Urban Land Institute's Real Estate Diversity Initiative last week, and that's targeting emerging developers. There are lots of events like that to be able to just make folks aware that these funds are available, and then encourage them to apply and/or to talk to us so we can kind of explain the brownfields process so that they feel like they can navigate that more confidently.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much for coming by, Supervisor. Next on the agenda, we have Director Dahlman from MnDOT returning. Welcome back, Director. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Lee. And committee, my name is Amber Dahlman. I am the Director of MnDOT's Office of Sustainability and Public Health.
So, Mr. Chair and members, in the area of resilience, according to FFIS, approximately $18.2 billion is available under the IIJA for states. $148 million is projected to flow to the state as an entity, and as you'll be hearing today from MnDOT, the bulk of those dollars are flowing there. That said, there are a number of programs that go to other agencies, and I want to highlight two significant programs in this area that fall outside of the purview of MnDOT. The first is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC program. Minnesota has been awarded $5.5 million through the Department of Public Safety to undertake hazard mitigation projects, reducing risks from disasters and natural hazards. Eligibility is restricted to states and territories that have had a major disaster declaration under the Stafford Act in the 7 years prior to the annual application period. It's a little bit of a wonky eligibility there. But local governments and tribes are able to apply through the state as sub-applicants in that process. For Minnesota, the bulk of the funding has been used to update state and county hazard mitigation plans, which are required to be updated every 5 years through with FEMA. The second program of note falling outside of MnDOT's purview is the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program. This program is administered by Minute Services and aims to mitigate cyber threats to state agencies and local units of government, schools, and tribal nations. There's a slide at the end of this section containing additional information on this program for your reference, and it's also got a couple of helpful links to some materials on the web related to the program.
Great. All right, so as Micah mentioned, I'm going to talk about the PROTECT program. And this is a formula program that comes to MnDOT. It is just, as you saw on the previous slide, just over $121 million over the 5 years, federal fiscal years 22 to 26. This means we get about $23 million annually for resilience-related projects. The types of projects and the benefits that you'll notice with this particular program is that our transportation system is better prepared for heavy rain and flooding that we have been seeing more frequently. Extreme temperatures, differences in freeze-thaw cycles and changes, and better ways to adapt to winter weather. So there are some limitations to how we can use these funds in particular. There is a small percentage, around 2%, that need to be used for planning activities annually, which is something that we're currently in the process of. We can also look at using these funds to construct new capacity where appropriate, and may also use some of the funds for development phase activities. Just a couple of things to note for you all, that in fiscal year 24, we did have 23 PROTECT projects, and these were totaling just over $47 million. We also, I think you heard recently about the carbon reduction program last week, had 27 CRP-related projects in fiscal year 24, which are the two major resilience and sustainability programs that our office administers. So just under $80 million for those two programs over the course of 2 years. The way that MnDOT, next slide, distributes these funds currently, you can see the distribution up here. These are formula funds. We are in the process of developing a resilience improvement plan, and so in the absence of that plan, we're using our standard process for distributing funds to our districts and our area transportation partnerships. These formulas get determined based on population within the certain geographies of the state, as well as their roadway network, generally the road, heavy vehicle, commercial traffic, and bridges within those areas. So you can see the amounts that each district or region within the state gets in fiscal years 25 and 26 listed up on this slide. Some of the things to note regarding this is that we're still working on our target amounts for future years of the program, and some of the amounts that you see here do not reflect an anticipated increase in these particular Protect funds. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, we funded 23 projects in fiscal year '24, and the types of projects that these particular funds helped to support were bridge reconstruction and elevation of roads in at-risk areas of flooding. They also helped to support culvert replacements, drainage area enhancements, some things related to landside protection measures, floodplain conservation and preservation, and they included drought-tolerant and fire-resistant landscaping and implementation of clear zones. A couple of examples that I can share with you throughout the state. In the northeast part of the state, this included some culvert replacements on State Highway 61, and in other parts of the state, this included stabilizing, so in District 7, which is around the Mankato area, stabilizing riverbank and slopes along Highway 30 and Highway 40. And then there's some things related to erosion repair in the southwestern part of the state. We've also been working on some underpasses in the Fargo-Moorhead metropolitan area, as well as some reconstruction and storm sewer upgrades in the Met Council area. Okay, I think that moves us to some things that I want to share quickly before I move on to the competitive side of this funding, is that beyond the capital projects, we know that these funds will help us with some of our policy and procedure updates to increase our own climate resilience. So we're planning for making sure that our guidance as we develop projects considers ways to incorporate climate resilience. And this includes updating our drainage manual as well as regular resilience improvement plan updates. We're also looking at ways that we can communicate and provide some education and training around how to incorporate resilience into our projects, as well as how we communicate this to people throughout the state. So that concludes the formula program for Protect. There's also a competitive or discretionary side to this particular program. What I can share about this is that MnDOT has submitted 3 applications for competitive funding. We are still waiting to hear back from FHWA about these particular applications. You can see them starred on the map to your right. This includes a planning application related to Bridge Watch, which is covering and centralizes how we collect data and our ability to alert key personnel when an issue is anticipated on a bridge. We had our bridge office take the lead on this particular project as well. Then we had some projects along I-94 looking at snow fences between Moorhead and Alexandria to help with blowing snow and our overall maintenance of that particular corridor in the winter months. And then the last project that we submitted for resilience was up in near Highway 11 and the Rainy River slide near Loman. So just briefly, some of the challenges that we're aware of related to this and other programs is that when we were submitting projects for the federal funds, we did not have a resilience improvement plan in place yet, and this resilience improvement plan is helping us to identify priorities for how we're going to address hazards and where we're most likely to see hazards on our trunk highway, or on our transportation system generally, I should say. And when we have identified areas within our resilience improvement plan, this also does make us eligible for decreasing that match portion that's required. So many federal programs and projects require 80% federal funds, a 20% non-federal match. If we identify projects in our resilience improvement plan, we can decrease that non-federal match to up to 10%. There's some limitations within that, but generally speaking, once we have a plan in place, we'll be able to be better prepared for submitting for discretionary funds, one, and also procuring additional funds to support these projects outside of a state match. I believe that, let's see, concludes the slides that I have related to the Protect program.
Representative Erdahl. Director.
Chair, Representative, thank you for the question. I do not have the definition immediately in front of me. We do have information on our website that I can direct you to and follow up with you on.
Please send it to Ms. Nash, and then we'll make sure to send it to the committee. Representative Erdahl.
Pretty much all I had. Just want to know if there is a definition, what this actually is.
Thank you. Representative Carroll.
Thank you, Chair and Ms. Dolman. Is there any local participation on these grants and awards? And if so,
Director.
how much?
Thank you, Chair and Representative. Yes, we do have local involvement with the formula funds in particular. Our local partners are also eligible to submit for the discretionary program. Regarding the local funds, I mentioned earlier on a slide the distribution that we have for our districts as well as our area transportation partnerships. The area transportation partnerships are responsible for the local networks and local systems, so our cities and counties.
Representative Carroll.
Thank you. I guess I don't think I understand what you just said, and whether it's a yes or no, whether there's local participation, if so, how much? Is it a formula or what? I'm not following you.
Director.
And it's my fault, Mike.
Yep. Chair, Representative, thank you. So yes, we do have local participation. With these funds in particular, the current way that we're distributing the funds is that 70% of the Protect funds to our districts, MnDOT districts, 30% of the Protect federal funds go to our area local partners specifically. And those local partners can make decisions on the types of projects they would like to see funded in their regions.
Great. Thank you.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And when you were talking about culverts, I was thinking about the presentation we had at Whitewater with the little buggy that went through the culverts. And I think part of the discussion here on the significant federal dollars is what are things that could be funded through this money instead of bonding? I mean, if we have a limited pool of capital investment dollars and we're able to do culverts, we're able to upgrade that with competitive resilience, how do we mesh that? Because we have so much demand, you might have more money. And so if that can go towards some of those priorities for MnDOT, and I'll just throw in too the snow fences. You know, we had living snow fence appropriations as well, you know, with trying to build in resiliency beyond just the physical structure. I mean, if there's things like that the federal money can pay for, I think we would prefer that they do.
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative, it's a very good point, and not only one that's well taken, but I think one that's already in action. So since having these conversations with this committee as well as the Senate Capital Investment Committee, my name and phone number are getting out into the world, and that's a good thing. So I received a call, had a call this morning with a local watershed in the New Brighton area who is looking to do culvert work and curious about what the non-state pots of money are. That's not to say that every project will be eligible for every federal dollar, but that the conversation is happening. And I think that that's a really good place for us to be at so that we can solve some of these problems more holistically.
Representative Hanson. So first we got Representative Hussein and then Representative Scrowder. Representative Hussein.
Thank you for being here. I just want to follow up with Representative Carl's questions. For the 30%, what specifically community, underserved community that you have been partnership and working with?
Director.
Chair, Representative, thank you for the question. I can't give you specific projects currently. What I can share with you is that in our resilience improvement plan, one of the criteria that we have for selecting projects and that we award points to is identifying underserved communities that are being impacted and affected by the transportation infrastructure and system in selecting those projects. So this plan is helping us to identify priorities. Environmental justice communities are one of those selection criteria for projects.
Representative Hussein.
Is there a percentage that you have in mind that's been allocated?
Director.
Chair, Representative, we don't have a percentage. We have the The Resilience Improvement Plan is in draft. We're working on finalizing it right now. What we have is scoring criteria that has points awarded to it. I can't recall off the top of my head what those points are in relationship to the overall total.
Can you follow up with that information for us? Thank you. Representative Hussein? Representative Scrappa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, the $148 million in projected allocations and awards to Minnesota, what is our match? You know what our match is to that, and where does it come from?
Director?
Mr. Chair and Representative, I don't have the exact match for this particular program. It sort of varies from program to program. We can get that for you. I think to the where does it come from question, so last legislative session, monies were appropriated to MnDOT for match, both for local units and competitive projects that they're going after, as well as some competitive projects that MnDOT is going after. So that covers a good, is being put to use for those match purposes. I'm not sure if Director Dahlman has the specific matching requirements, if any, for Protect, but we can follow up with you if she doesn't.
Sounds good. Representative Scrappa?
Mr. Chair, the other, what's happening today is MnDOT is part, correct me if I'm going down the wrong path, but MnDOT is part of putting charging stations in on the interstate system. Am I so far correct?
Director?
Thank you. So where the charging stations are going to go, are these hazard mitigation sites? Are these sites, because if there's a fire or whatever might happen, is there anything set up for that? And do any of these funds, revolving loan funds, come into play for that?
Director Dahlman?
Chair, Representative, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're wondering if the electric vehicle charging stations we're putting in are identified as at risk for resilient or hazards?
Yeah.
That's correct. One, we have not selected the charging station locations yet. We have received applications for those, but we have not finalized those locations. Once we know the locations, we can cross-check them with our resilience improvement plan and hazards in those areas.
Representative Scrappa?
That is all. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Just one follow-up to that real quickly regarding the applications. Who submit these applications? Are they the local communities that want it, or how do MnDOT go about receiving those applications?
Chair Lee, thank you for the question. And I believe this is about the Protect program, not about electric vehicles, just clarifying.
The EV charger,
The EV chargers?
yeah, that you mentioned.
Okay. So, Chair, thank you for the question. The electric vehicle infrastructure program that we're administering, that RFP recently closed earlier this month, February 9th, and we had eligibility criteria on our website where it was private-public partnerships could submit applications. So it could be a community, it could be a private partner that was submitting those applications, and we had a mix.
Got it, thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you, Director. Next, we have Director Freeman from the Minnesota Public Facilities Authority. Welcome, Director. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair Lee, members of the committee. My name is Jeff Freeman. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Public Facilities Authority.
So, Mr. Chair and members, in the area of water, per FFIS, $55.3 billion is available under the IIJA for states. $717 million is projected to flow to the state of Minnesota, and all but one of these programs fall under the purview of the Minnesota Public Facilities Authority. Nearly $72 million of formula funds have been set aside for Minnesota under the Emerging Contaminants in Small or Disadvantaged Communities Grant Program. These dollars flow through the Minnesota Department of Health. The purpose of these funds are to provide financial assistance for small or disadvantaged communities needing to address emerging contaminants in their drinking water. In Minnesota, these funds will be used to provide grants to address manganese and PFAS. Water systems must have received a health risk advisory from MDH to be eligible for these funds, and projects must be listed on the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund project priority list, which you'll hear Mr. Freeman speak to in more detail. We've received $28.6 million, or the first 2 years of the $72 million calculated amount to date.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the majority of the IIJA funds for water are based on state allocation formulas and flow through the PFA's Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund programs, total over 5 years of approximately $627 million. Those numbers have moved around a little bit. Director Indermill mentioned that before. Based on, there were some set-asides for OIG oversight. There's some changes based on state needs surveys. Each year's allocation is calculated separately. So our current best estimate is $627 million total. Under the revolving fund programs, there's actually 5 separate but related programs, and I'll provide an overview of each of these. All of the funds follow the existing state revolving fund process, with eligible projects start being ranked on 5-year project priority lists by the Pollution Control Agency and the Health Department, and then listed on the PFA's annual intended use plan when the projects are scheduled for construction. So the first program is the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, the existing program that we currently operate. This is the PFA's largest and longest running program, with over $3.7 billion in loans made since 1990. The IIJA will provide roughly $202 million over 5 years in the form of loans and principal forgiveness grants. For the existing program, IIJA requires 49% of the funds be provided as principal forgiveness grants, with the balance as low-interest loans, and also some small amounts for technical assistance set-asides. Eligible projects include replacement of aging infrastructure and various kinds of system improvements, basically all the components of a municipal wastewater system. In addition to the low-interest loans, then, the program provides principal forgiveness grants based on affordability criteria, energy efficiency, and green infrastructure. The PFA has received year 1 IIJ funds, about $32.7 million, which are committed to 2024 and 25 construction projects through the PFA's 2024 intended use plan that was approved last fall. The total intended use plan covers about 102 projects for almost $600 million. We expect the year 2 IIJA funds to receive those this summer, and then they will be used for projects on next year's 2025 intended use plan. The IIJA also dedicates funds for clean water emerging contaminants, $17.4 million over 5 years. Addressing emerging contaminants, primarily PFAS, on the wastewater side has some unique challenges. MPCA is exploring potential uses. One possibility is pretreatment of landfill leachate. But in the meantime, the PFA has transferred the clean water emerging contaminant funds to the drinking water emerging contaminant program that I'll talk about in a minute. Switching to the drinking water programs, the first is the existing Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Again, low-interest loans. In this case, since 1999, the program has provided a total of $1.2 billion in low-interest loans. In addition, there are principal forgiveness grants based on affordability. For the existing program, IIJA requires 49% of the funds to be provided as principal forgiveness, with the balance as low-interest loans and some small amounts for technical assistance set-asides. Again, we're primarily talking about replacement of aging infrastructure, pipes, treatment plants, water towers, all of those kind of components. The PFA has received the year one funds, about $27.5 million, which are committed to 2024-25 construction projects through the 2024 intended use plan. That 24 intended use plan includes a total of 156 projects for over $600 million worth of construction projects. We expect the year two IIJ funds will receive those this summer, and they'll be used for the 2025 intended use plan. IIJA also includes dedicated funds for drinking water emerging contaminants, $57.8 million over 5 years. And in this case, all of those funds are for principal forgiveness grants with some allowance for some set-asides. Eligible projects include drinking water treatment for manganese and PFAS. These funds will be coordinated with the small community program that was just mentioned, a separate pot of money through MDH, but we will be coordinating the funds with MDH to cover as many projects as possible. The year one funds, $13.3 million. That includes the amount transferred from the clean water side, has been committed to projects on the 2024 IUP. We expect this summer we'll receive year two funds that'll go for projects on next year's intended use plan. Next slide, please. And then finally, the IIJ provides very significant funding for lead service line replacement, an estimated $195 million over 5 years. 49% of that is available for principal forgiveness grants, the balance for low-interest loans and some set-aside activities. Drinking water service lines in general have split ownership between the city and the property owner, which creates a number of challenges that we've been working through over the past year. Under the program, all lead components, the pipes and all components must be replaced. So whether it's public or private, it'll all be replaced. The federal funds here will be combined with state funds that were appropriated last year in order to accomplish this work at no cost to the property owner or the city. That was very important in terms of really accelerating these projects and meeting the state's goal of having all lead pipes replaced by 2033. Year one funds have been received, $43.3 million for projects on the 2024 IUP, which is, I believe, 64 projects in 43 cities. Year two funds will be received this summer and will be used for projects on the next 2025 intended use plan. A quick summary of the state match requirements. IIJA requires a 10 to 20% match for the existing program funds, 10% the first 2 years, 20% the last 3 years. There is no match requirement for the emerging contaminant or lead service line funds. And then there's also, for the existing base funding that we receive for the two revolving funds, there's also a 20% match. So last year, the legislature appropriated $41 million for state match needed for IIJA through the first 3 years of IIJA and also the base federal funding through 2024. The governor's bonding rec for this year is for $39 million, which will provide the needed match for the last 2 years of IIJA, as well as the base funding through 2026. In total, about $196 million of federal funds unlocked from that $39 million of state match. With that, I'll stop and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Freeman. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director Freeman. Appreciate the work that you do. I think you know that I've been a long-time supporter of these programs. I'm just wondering, I guess I've been asking this other times. Okay, a lot of these programs are over 5 years. Do you have a total for the amount of dollars that are coming to Minnesota through this program?
Director Freeman.
Yes, total was $627 million over 5 years.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you. So $627 million over 5 years. Appreciate that information. Now, let's just take, like, this year, we appropriated, like, in the last capital investment bill, around $380 million for PFA. And there are also then local projects that, I guess were earmarked, but were also PFA projects. I don't know what that amount is, maybe another 100 million or so. So then what you're getting in, say, like one of the 5 years, how much money will you have available for your PFA projects this next year?
Director Freeman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Erdahl, so PFA, we don't fund a project until it's ready to start construction. So the current year's intended use plans, the list of eligible projects to apply for and receive funds, as I mentioned, there are roughly $600 million worth of projects on the clean water list and another $600 million on the drinking water list, and we will fund all of those projects that are actually ready, complete the design process, complete the environmental review, are certified and ready, go through the bidding process, ready to start construction. Now, not all of those projects will be able to do that by the end of this fiscal year, and so then there's a process for projects to carry over to the next year's list that weren't bid and ready for construction. So we set a fundable range as far down the priority list as we possibly can. About 3/4 of all projects are in the fundable range. And at that point, it's really up to the cities to move with a lot of assistance and guidance and communication from PFA and our partner agencies, Pollution Control Agency and Health Department. But the cities dictate what's their schedule, how fast are they ready to move, and we will provide funding, loan funding for as many of those as are ready to go as are in that fundable range. Now, in a number of cases, projects are also eligible for the two large grant programs, Point Source Implementation Grants and WIF grants. And to some extent, those tend to be the limiting factors for some projects that are grant eligible, but the grant funds aren't as ready as quickly, and we don't have as much ability to, or we don't have the ability, those are state appropriations, whereas the loan program is composed of appropriations, revolving loan repayments, PFA revenue bond proceeds. There's more sources that we can use, which makes the loan funds something that we can stretch further.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director Freeman. I appreciate your complete, somewhat detailed answer. Over the years, I know years where, like glad that I think we are getting closer to the point where the needs of our cities, our towns across Minnesota are being met. You, I don't recall, or maybe you haven't announced it, for this particular capital investment bill, what is your request going to be?
Director Freeman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Erdahl, the total governor's recommendation for PFA was $109 million. That includes that $39 million that I mentioned for state match, as well as some funding for those additional programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one more comment, Director Freeman. So you think you'll be able to spend that money?
Director Freeman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Erdahl, without a doubt.
Thank you, Representative Erdahl. Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Freeman, would phosphorus levels and chloride levels be included for this funding? I'm just thinking of my Lake Winona that, we're looking at a $67 million total cost for a wastewater treatment upgrade.
Director Freeman.
Mr. Chair, Representative, the project specifically to treat specific pollutants to more stringent permit requirements for water quality goals, those are specifically what the point source implementation grant program is designed for, to help cities do that. Those grants can be up to 80%, but it's only for the components specifically to treat those pollutants. A lot of times cities will be doing other rehab work as part of the project. And so whatever the grant would not cover, then we would provide a PFA low-interest loan for the balance of those funds.
Representative Franzen.
Mr. Freeman, what is that grant called again?
Director Freeman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Point Source Implementation Grants, PSIG.
Okay.
Representative Franzen.
So we have an issue too, because Alexandria is a little too large for the PSIG grant?
Director Freeman.
Mr. Chair, Representative, the PSIG grant, there's no size limit or affordability on that.
Sorry, yeah, so we're waiting to see if we'll get that legislation passed to lift that on there, I guess.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Erdahl is concerned whether you could spend the money. I want to know where you spend the money. So I'd like a list of the lead service line programs where the grants have gone out. We've had this conversation for, I think, 4 years now about affordability and how looking at criteria beyond the median household income. So, with the federal dollars, and I know other states are looking at census tract and other criteria to try to reach people who historically have not been reached before, but we seem to be not doing that. So could you maybe describe your perspective on affordability and how it applies to both the federal and the state dollars?
Director Freeman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hanson. So with the exception of lead service lines, in general, all users of a municipality's water system receive the same quality of water and the same level of service. So what we're really looking at in terms of affordability is a city's needs and capacity to generate revenue to meet those needs. And so then you come to the question of what's a reasonable level of effort for a city to put towards meeting its own water infrastructure needs. And that's where the WIF affordability criteria, which also then are used for the federal principal forgiveness on affordability, comes down to what does it cost to run the system and how many users does a city have to generate revenue. The the smaller cities with small user base really become the ones that are most impacted by or most at risk of not being able to meet those needs. And our concern is the purpose of the WIF program is to help cities meet those needs, replacing aging infrastructure that they would otherwise not be able to meet. And the purpose is really to be able to reduce the risk of major system failure of that infrastructure system. And so the WIF criteria look at in great detail at the cost of running the system and the number of users. The actual rates that a city charges are set by the city itself. And between setting base rates and volume rates, and there are some adjustments and flexibilities that cities have, but, and we don't tell cities what their rates need to be. We look at what's the amount of revenue in total that the city is able to generate from its system. We believe it's a very effective way to look at what's the state's role in helping cities meet those needs to replace aging infrastructure. Now, it's not to say that there aren't other things to look at or other types of projects, and we would agree that in addition to affordability, there are ways to use the revolving fund to address specific types of project needs. Certainly, we've now done that with lead service line, and we're working through that on the emerging contaminants. Green infrastructure is another area where, frankly, I think we need to do more, and having conversations with our partners at Pollution Control Agency about how can we make better use of or take advantage of some opportunities to use some of these funds for in the area of green infrastructure. So there's a variety of aspects here, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Director Freeman. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, that I understand about the ability to pay and the ongoing ability to pay, but you may have poorer communities with higher population, but lower capacity to pay, that their property tax value, that there are areas within the metro area that are not wealthy, that when they're compared against other communities, they are stuck with loans rather than grants. And this just keeps happening. And here when we have the biggest amount of infusion of dollars federally in our lifetimes, it continues to happen. And then we come to the bonding committees and the same thing happens. And so I think we have to look at and the issue on ability to pay within a community. If you are in Minneapolis, there may be very wealthy areas and there may be very poor areas. And the ability to pay of the ratepayer is different within those. And other states seem to be trying to resolve this, and we still keep doing what we keep doing. So, Mr. Chair, I think we have to keep looking at this.
Thank you, Representative Hansen. We will continue to look at this. And so maybe more of a request to the PFA and Department of Health before we adjourn. It was mentioned that the Emerging Contaminants and Small Disadvantaged Communities Grant Program is managed through MDH through some of their health risk advisories. And so can I get from MDH a list of communities from Minnesota who have been receiving these health risk advisories by the time that we start our next committee hearing, and then also to maybe to the PFA of the 2023 appropriations for the lead service line that was outside of the capital budget. Can you let us know how much have been expended and encumbered? And so with that, members, before we adjourn, just want to adopt the minutes for February 21st, 2024. Vice Chair Ryan, do you have a motion to adopt the minute?
Chair, we can move approval of the minutes for
Vice Chair Ryan moves approval of minutes for February 21st. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the minutes are adopted. Members, I look forward to seeing all of you next Wednesday, the 28th. We will be at 2 p.m. instead of our normal 1 p.m. start time, and we'll go until 3:30, and we will have a hearing focused on PFAS and infrastructure. With that, the meeting is adjourned.